Hello, my name is David Bainbridge. I'm a restoration ecologist, and I've worked in desert and drylands for almost 40 years. Today I'm going to talk about irrigation for remote sites. It's really a critical part of many restoration projects. The world's drylands are increasingly in trouble. Climate change is making them hotter and drier, and many areas have been damaged by overgrazing, overcutting, and other issues that reduce productivity and quality of life for residents. Super efficient irrigation is essential, and yet little work has been done in some areas. The learning outcomes we'd like to come up for on this are that you understand the need for irrigation, you can evaluate options for irrigation, and that you have some thought about how to maintain and use a remote site irrigation system. I started out on this at UC Riverside in the 1980s, and one of the things I was doing was root races to see how fast roots could grow, and I was very impressed with most species. They can really get up and go with good conditions. And you can see the shoots here are quite small, but the roots are already at the bottom of these containers. Irrigation is needed at almost every restoration site because you just can't count on the rain, and it's too hard to wait around to plant till after a rain. So what we really end up doing quite often is supplying water, even though it's costly and difficult, and holding the plants so that when it does rain, they'll be ready to take off like a rocket. Rainwater harvesting can really help. If it does rain, you want to catch and keep as much as you can. And then if you have irrigation systems, you want to make sure that they use as little water as possible. I took my deep root studies out into the field and occasionally would dig as deep as I could get to see how the roots were doing. This is a mesquite tree, and its root is down where my hand is. And even there, it wasn't the deepest root. That was just as deep as I could get by digging a hole with a shovel. These plant roots can grow fast, and they have to keep up with the groundwater as the groundwater dries up. Shoots can be small, but don't be fooled. The roots can be really big. Here's some soil moisture information from Deep Canyon, which is not too far from here. On the right side, you can see August 23rd, which is after a major flow event, 22 centimeters of rain, and the soil water is recharged as deep as we could get with a neutron probe down to 2.5 meters, and actually much deeper probably. Many of these desert plants will establish only with the flash flood, and if you're going to try and cheat nature or surprise nature, you have to do almost as well in deep water. Really important. We also want to know how the soil is taking up water from rain, and we can do that with a simple hole test and see how fast the soil can drain. We can use an infiltrometer, a little fancier system, and this is a little portable double ring infiltrometer that I developed so we could carry it out into the field. You can also do this with a very expensive and big piece of equipment. And then for long-term studies, a neutron probe is helpful. This uses radiation to help monitor moisture in the deep soil, and as deep as you can dig a hole, you can lower the neutron probe down and see what the deep soil water is doing. We can harvest rainwater by making pits or swales and lots of other things to shape the soil. They can be made by people randomly or machines not so randomly. And you can also use rock lines and crescents. One of the things to do is to try and look like a natural pattern. And what you can do is dig the pits or basins, put in the seeds, add some mulch, or alternatively you can install container plants. The photos here are from the drylands of Jordan, and you can see the pit basin here has got seedlings were planted in it, and in 5 years they had just a great take of plants from these basins and pits. Otherwise, this area was, as you can see, just totally barren. At Hungry Valley State Vehicle Recreation Area, we did quite a bit of work, and one of the projects was to try and revegetate some areas that had been cleared off by motorcycle use. And this was done by pitting by hand, by seeding into the pits with mulch, putting up a fence to reduce damage. And you can see the establishment after 3 years. Most of the pits have a shrub growing in them. On the north slope, we had grass instead, and it filled in almost all the pits on the backside. One of our projects was out at the end of a four-wheel drive sandy road, and we wanted to get rainwater if we could, so we put in this very large impermeable membrane, and with the help of many volunteers, because it was heavy, we got it in place. And it would collect water with just 1/100 of an inch of rain. It was really durable stuff and held up well. And it provided a low-cost source of water on the site that we could carry out and do on our plantings. You can also do rainwater harvesting for each plant in different ways. Highly developed in the Negev desert by the Nabateans many centuries ago. And here's a different example from Australia. It combines the catchment, which was done with a furrow lined with plastic, which took the water into a basin, and the basin, also made of plastic, had a wick, and the wick went down to the roots of the plant, and this worked really well for establishing an orchard. The thing you're seeing that's peeled back is the weed mat. And weed mat can be helpful in some cases, but you have to wonder what's going on underneath the weed mat. It can be a problem for rodents and other things. I think there's a chance that maybe recycled linoleum flooring could be used as a material for rainwater harvesting. If you have to hand water, I'd recommend these French watering jug from Gardener's Supply. They're big, they're ergonomic, they're easy to carry, and they're easy to water from. Perfect for pouring into deep pipes. If you have access to the site, you can actually have a truck with a water tank, and that makes it a lot easier. You get pretty good at wrestling that hose, and you can do a lot of plants that way, but it does take its toll on the site, moving the truck around. You also will need a pump with a shutoff on it. The simplest method of watering is just using a tree shelter and pouring into the tree shelter. Not all species will tolerate this, but many will, and it's a very low cost. A better system is to use a deep pipe, and this can be a PVC pipe, low, it doesn't have to be a very fancy pipe, and 14 to 24 inches long, 1.5 to 2 inch diameter. Turned out to be more workable than larger. And it has 1/8 inch holes drilled down one side where the plant roots are. The top has to be screened, and you want to put the pipe on the upslope or upwind to help protect the plant. This can be filled by hand or with a pipe network. Grazing pressure is shown here with the example of a deep pipe. The lower tree shelter has barely escaped from its container after 10 years. The taller shelter, getting the same amount of water, has escaped and grew quite quickly after a big rain event. There are lots of other options. You can use bamboo with the nodes knocked or drilled out. You can use a commercial deep pipe, which comes equipped with the option for a drip emitter. Expensive, but nice. Theoretically, you can drive these into the ground, but most desert soils, you're not going to manage to drive them anywhere. You can also use a pipe on a water bottle, inverted water bottle, and you can cut the bottom of the water bottle to make it a hinged flap. You can use these tall containers as deep pipes. They're not really deep, but they're deeper, and they can be hooked up with the drip tubing you see here. Repurposing the containers is often the cheapest way you can get a deep pipe. Deep pipes work. They really help get the roots deep in the soil and protect plants from drought. You might start out with a refill every 2 to 3 weeks if you can, then once a month, then once or twice each summer. And if there's a remote tank, you want to make sure the batteries in the valve are operating properly. Deep pot irrigation takes the deep pot that you've grown the plant in with a really long root and tips it upside down to become the deep pipe for watering. And these deep pots are available from Stewie & Sons up in Oregon. Planting the plants is just as challenging as planting the deep pipes, and we've used a variety of hand augers and tractor mounted augers. If you can get a tractor in, that's the way you want to do it. It's faster and cheaper than doing it all by hand, but makes more of a mess. These chainsaw powered augers were really effective, but messy, hard work, and noisy. You got a little saturation of bar oil when you used them. They don't have to be big pipes if you do drip system. A little more reliable than a conventional drip system because you get the water deeper in the soil, but you're still able to pull it up and check to make sure that they're operating properly. These work very well with the tank and timer valve. And here's an installation of these small pipes along Highway 86, totally barren ground. And then just a couple of years later, the Palo Verdes and Mesquites have really taken off. The battery-powered timers we used needed a little pressure to work, so the tanks had to be elevated to work better. Remote tanks can be made from different materials. Plastic tanks held up well and were not vandalized, fortunately. They're painted with latex paint and dusted with dirt to protect them from ultraviolet. Stock tanks were used on this project, but they rusted, and we decided we preferred the plastic tanks instead. You can see the one tank is tucked under the bridge, and it has a fill pipe so the water truck could stop and fill the tank very quickly and efficiently. On one site where we were recreating mesquite mounds, we had so many plants that we thought we'd do a drip system with elevated tanks, and it worked well at first, but algae and lines soon diminished the performance, and we had to use a pump when we'd go out to visit the site to get the flow that we needed. In this case, the tanks were not disturbed while we were doing the experiment, but once the experiment was shut down, someone liberated the tanks and the towers. The most efficient system we found really is wick irrigation, and this can be either capillary wick or a gravity wick. For the capillary wick, the water flows up through the wick by capillary action and then down into the soil. For the gravity wick, it's just by gravity. It flows through the wick, but it flows very slowly compared to an open tube and can get much more efficient performance. And you can actually get both effects in certain setups. So it starts off as a gravity system, which is what the plants need to really grow fast, and then turns into a capillary system, which provides enough water to keep plants alive until it finally rains. You need to test the material carefully. This is not something that's commercially available as a kit. What kind of tank are you going to use? What sort of flow rate do you hope to get? But they're ideal for remote sites because they're so efficient. It's like having an IV for a person. Wick tests can be done very easily with just a little food coloring and water. Hang the rope or wick into the water tank and see how fast and how far the water rises by capillary action in the narrow little passages in the rope. My test found that the nylon solid braid rope was best, and that's what I used for most of my later experiments. But you can test, and you may find something that works as well. The gravity-fed wicks have a high flow rate, and you can actually see the plants grow if they have gravity wicks. If they have capillary flow, it's enough to keep them alive until it rains, kind of a natural approach to it. And here's a chart of some of the performance of the capillary rise. You can see the 13 millimeter rope, which was made of polyester, actually worked quite well and was above 40 centimeters. tests are critical. You can get experience with this in your home garden or landscape with a variety of containers with wicks that are sold by Gardener Supply. You can buy the wick fittings you need from Granger's Supply. The first test we did with wicks was in 1989 using small cotton wicks, 3/16 inch. The water flows to the roots by capillary action, and it did improve survival, but there was too little flow. Algae grew in the cotton, and the systems gradually failed. What we ended up with years later is 7/16 inch solid braid nylon rope, washed carefully inside a bag, and run under a vinyl tube, 1/2 inch in inner diameter, and you may need to make a little coat hanger hook to pull the wick through. And this goes to a fitting that goes from the vinyl tube into a container. Here's what it looks like in the field. In this case, the mesquite tree was grown in a tree shelter, and as the plant was planted, the container was pulled up and became the tree shelter. So nothing to take back in the truck after the planting. You can see the 5-gallon container and the wick, and these had to be staked carefully and tied down to resist the wind. Here's a close-up detail of the vinyl tubing, the fittings to the tank, the screw valve, and the wick disappearing into the hole, and the mesquite root going down deep into the hole. These had 100% survival. And you can see here the plant condition of this little test. All were in good condition for almost 2 years. One of the thoughts with wicks is that they could be used to help get roots to groundwater, and this is critical in many areas. The groundwater may only be 10 feet deep, but the tree is not going to get to that by any normal means. If you see trees that are happy in the area, they got there a long time ago, probably during a big flood event when the soil was wetted all the way down to the groundwater. But if you could get a wick down to the groundwater, it could rise up by capillary action and meet the water coming down from a gravity wick and link roots to the groundwater. That's the challenge. Another option for some places, if you're doing windbreaks or other sort of linear plantings, is to use a slotted drain pipe, which would be used around your house foundation to get the water away. Only here we're using it to put the water efficiently into the soil. And this worked pretty well. In addition to the water from the pipe, there's some water in this case from the little runoff from the highway itself. And it really can be effective. We used a variety of different irrigation systems at Red Rock Canyon State Park, but the predominant ones were the deep pipes and watering into tree shelters. And within a little more than 10 years, it looked pretty good. After 20 years, it was really hard to see where some of the things had been. But you can see some lines of plants, and we realized after this first big project that you had to watch out how you placed your plants so it didn't look too artificial. What type of irrigation system you use is really up to you, and you have to think about access, where you will get the water, how will you haul it, what the water quality is. Often the desert sources are salty, so we often ended up taking water from San Diego out to the desert, which is kind of crazy. What's the reliability of your supply system? Can you be sure that water will get there when you need it? We had really good luck in one case with the volunteer fire department filling our tanks. And then what's the plant development stage when they're going out, and what sort of maintenance is going to be possible? The most efficient system of all that's really been used widely in parts of the world is clay pot irrigation, or Oya irrigation. This turns out to be self-regulating because the water moves through the clay pot based on the water pressure, and water use of the plants reduces the pressure and the water flows more freely. So it's really pretty amazing. Simple, efficient, particularly good for cuttings, as you see here with willow cuttings. It's reusable, although after a few years it may need to be rinsed in vinegar water to cut down the calcium deposits. The problem is it's expensive. Oyas can sell for $20 to $30, and even these clay pots cost $4 or $5 each, and then you have to plug the hole with a rubber plug or epoxy or some other material to plug the hole so it'll hold water. They're planted to depth so the rim of the pot is above the soil and things don't fall in too easily. And then it has a lid on top which will have a hole drilled in it, so if it does rain, the rainwater goes into the pot as well. How good are these? Well, in Kenya, a big study was done looking at tomato crops, and the clay pots cut water use 98% compared to furrow irrigation, while, impressively, they increased the yield 44%, so you can't beat that. This is a traditional system used in China. I found about it in a agricultural text from 80 BCE, so that's more than 2,000 years ago. This was well known and widely used in China, and you can see why. The textbook had been written for the emperor for people who had too little land and too little water, and what could be better than the effectiveness of clay pot irrigation. They're reusable, wash every year. For more information, you can go to Gardening with Less Water, which has a subtitle, Use Up to 90% Less Water, and you can see that the Kenyans did better than that. It also includes suggestions for other efficient irrigation systems, and for detailed desert restoration information, my book from 2007 is still probably the best one out there. I've got as much as I could up on the web for free, so take a look at sustainabilityleader.org and the works.be press for David _A_ Bainbridge, and how to make an infiltrometer, penetrometers, other tools, how to do site evaluation, improve site regeneration, all sorts of stuff. We saw this deep planting rig in China, and I fell in love with it right away. It's a hydraulic drive, and you can see it's more than 2 meters long and really would be perfect for deep planting. I'd like to thank all the volunteers and students who worked for me over the years, faculty and staff at UC Riverside, San Diego State, Alliant International, William Carey International, and United States International Universities who helped me with the research and fieldwork. And to the organizations that help fund research, particularly John Rieger and Caltrans. West Jarrow and Ross, Virginia were good mentors, and they're shown here with their drill team doing deep soil studies in Harper's Well and near Borrego Springs. They found that the deep soil ecosystems were very dynamic and active, and that the nitrogen fixation was really taking place deep in the soil. And up until this work, there had been some thought that mesquite wasn't a very good nitrogen fixer because there weren't many nodules near the surface. Thanks very much for your attention, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.